Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast. It's a place where we explore the world of horror in film, television, literature, and popular culture. Hello, everyone. My name is Bruce Markison. Welcome to the show. As always, I'm joined by producer and co-host Tracy Asteria. Tracy, welcome to you as well. How are you doing?
I'm doing really great, Bruce. I'm quite excited to speak with our guest tonight. How's everything going with you?
Good. I'm actually just back from a horror and sci-fi convention. And after we finish our interview with our guest, we'll talk about that a bit toward the end of the show. But we do want to get to the guest right here at the top. And today our guest is an actor, writer, and producer. His name is Marc Sheffler. Marc played the character Junior Stillo in the iconic 1972 film The Last House on the Left, directed by Wes Craven. It was actually Craven's first full-length feature film. Marc has also written scripts for a number of television specials and series. He's written for some comedies like Charles in Charge, and also for a fantasy TV series. A lot of you might remember the film Harry and the Hendersons, which I believe came out in the late 1980s. And Marc was one of the writers on the TV series, a version of that. The Harry and the Hendersons TV series aired from 1991 to 1993. We have a lot we want to talk about with Marc Sheffler, our guest. Marc, welcome to the Ghostly Gallery. Thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's fun.
Nice to have a chance to talk to someone that is really an interesting part of horror history. We're going to talk about The Last House on the Left. It's a film that a lot of people have very strong feelings about. We'll get Marc's thoughts on it as well. We wanted to begin, Marc, with your youth, your years growing up. Were you a big fan of horror from a young age, or was that something that came later on?
I was a big fan of show business. I was a big fan of entertainment. I had an interesting beginning. I lived alone with my father most of my young life until he remarried. So right around my 10th birthday, my father was this kind of pinky ring wearing, custom made mohair suit wearing, Cadillac driving, aluminum siding salesman. In fact, he was a legend in his arena. He was pretty much the top of that food chain. So, and he was one of these guys who, for whatever reason, he was an out of the box thinker. And I think that's one of the major things that I inherited from him, was the belief that if I could think it, I could make it happen. Right. So, I was heading to my 10th birthday, and he said to me, "Look, you're going to be 10. That's the end of one decade, the beginning of another." And I said, "Okay, yeah, sure." And he said, "But this is the most interesting decade of your life." And I said, "Well, okay, why?" And he said, "Well, because you're going to go into it a little boy, but when you come out of it, you'll be a young man." And I went, "Yeah, oh, wow." And I thought for a second. He said, "So let's kick it off right." And I said, "All right, what do you have in mind?" And he said, "Well, I'll get you anything you want for your 10th birthday." So being a child of my times, I said to my dad, "I want the Three Stooges." And he said back to me, "Well, I can't promise I'll get them, but I can promise I'll try." So a few days passed. It wasn't really more than a few days. And he said to me, "Look, I talked to somebody he knew at the Holiday House where they perform. He knew the booker there. And he said, they're not going to be here till January. We can have a party for you in September when your birthday is. But if you want to wait, I'll book another birthday party, a bigger birthday party at the Holiday House in January. And I can make a deal with the Stooges. I already talked to their manager in Los Angeles." And I said, "Sure, why not?" So in that January of 1959, I think it was like the first Saturday of the new year, about 80 of my friends and their families and people who heard about this but couldn't quite believe it, that somebody hired the Three Stooges for a birthday party. So we gathered at the Holiday House, and there they were. So they're on. We're in the club, and they're on stage. about halfway through the show, Mo Howard stops the show and looks at the audience and says, okay, so we're here to celebrate Mark's 10th birthday. Where's Mark? So I raise my hand. And my dad says, stand up, just stand up. So I stood up, and Mo starts talking to me. He says, your dad says that you're Pittsburgh's #1 Three Stooges fan. And I said, well, I am. And Mo said to me, well, we'll be the judge of that. Why don't you come up on the stage with us? And my father leaned over to me and whispered into my ear, there's no time to explain this now. Just get your ass up on that stage. So I went up on the stage. They handed me a microphone. I started to interact with them because I knew all the material. I knew all the bits because I would watch every day after school. I watched like an hour and a half of Stooges for years. And they're laughing. The Stooges are laughing because I know all this stuff. Because I'm like, I've really kind of, and I know the cues, and I really have it down. I just have, because I've seen it so many times. It was like memory, muscle memory. So then Mo stops the show again. He puts his hand on my forehead and he said, Mark, I dub you the fourth Stooge. And the fucking place exploded. It just like, those 80 people made a noise I had never heard before. And I thought to myself, oh shit, this feels really good. I want more of this. And the only metaphor I can think of is at night, like when a runway suddenly appears out of nowhere and lights up and the plane knows where to land or knows where to take off. That's what I felt like. It's just my whole life, the road to my whole life just lit up in that moment. And ever since that moment, and I had several other things like that. Like my father was friends with the late comedian Joey Bishop, and he was performing at the Holiday House one week, and we went to see him. And this was maybe a year, 2 years after the Stooges thing, where I had just been like watching every comedian on television and just going crazy for anything that was the hint of stand-up comedy, right? Or comedy on a stage. So I wrote a routine. Or I didn't know it was a routine. I had some things. Remember a show called The Rifleman with
Sure.
Chuck Connor? Okay.
Yeah.
So I used to draw these funny parallels between Lucas McCain and Mark McCain living alone together on a ranch in New Mexico with my father, whose name was Leonard, and me, whose name was Mark, living in an apartment in Pittsburgh, and how Luke would take Mark fishing with his fishing pole on Sunday, and my father would take me fishing in Schwartz's Deli, and so it was like I would draw all these, and Joey Bishop thought my retelling of like the Jewish rifleman, the Bagelman, right, was like the funniest thing he heard. He told my father, he said, I'm going to put this kid in my suitcase and take him back to Los Angeles with me. So at that point, when my father, I think when my father saw that, he really kind of got behind everything. He unlike a lot of people who tell their families and their parents early on that they want to go in the entertainment business, and they're completely dissuaded from it. My father was like, no, do it. You do it. You're good at this. You do it. And then I'll come visit you, which is exactly what happened. Right. So, yeah, it's some weird things, I just have never done anything else. I've just never conceived of doing anything else. Relatives conceived of me doing other things, but I never did. So that's pretty much how I got started, and there were some other things, but I would say that's, I'm writing a book right now about it. And I use that as the beginning of it.
Mm. So let me get this straight, Mark. The Stooges actually came to your house?
No. The birthday party was at the Holiday House
Oh,
in a
okay.
nightclub.
All right.
That's the name of a
But,
nightclub that used to be in the Pittsburgh area. And
but was it like
they
a
had,
private party for you and your friends and
yes,
family?
it was a
Oh,
completely
wow.
private party. Just my friends and family, and my dad hired the Stooges, to do a show.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's still pretty impressive. When they asked you to come up on stage, were you terrified?
Yeah, of course I was scared, but I think I was thrilled at the same time. And that kind of overwhelmed the fear. And especially when my father said to me, "No time to explain this now, just get your ass up on the stage." And I now know what he meant was, get up there and get that first experience, go feel that, because he was the manager of a nightclub in Pittsburgh that his uncle owned after World War II. And it was very similar to the Holiday House in the sense that it booked big name talent, real name talent. So that's how my dad actually met Joey Bishop. They became friends, and some other people. So yeah, it was pretty trippy. I have friends who I'm friends with today, who were there, and they still talk about it. They still, wow, Three Stooges.
If I was one of your friends, there would be nothing else I would talk about.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. So given your love of the Three Stooges and your love of the entertainment industry, were comedy films what you most gravitated to when you were young?
Yeah, because I learned early on through experience, that if you could make somebody laugh, they liked you. You became their buddy. They like, especially, people that would just, the more you made them laugh, the more, and I used to get out of trouble by being funny. I'd get in trouble, and then I'd get out of trouble by doing something funny. I used to make my grandmothers laugh. I was, I wasn't a class clown in school, though. I was funny only when I wanted to be, and it actually got me thrown out of junior high school. They called my father, and he said, "What now?" And they said, "Well, he's not a bad kid. Like, he doesn't do anything bad." And my father said, "Yes." He said, "We just can't have him here anymore." And my father said, "But he's not a bad kid. Why are you saying that?" He said, "Well, we don't know how he does it, but he has the ability to take over any class he wants at any time by just doing something that people apparently laugh at." He said, it's like that people laugh at. And we just can't have that. And my father said, "So what you're saying is you really can't have laughter. Is that what you're saying? You're going to outlaw laughter. You're getting rid of my son because he brings joy to people." And the guy looked at my father and said, "He has to leave, Mr. Sheffler, now, and so do you." So the funny thing is, I got put in a private day school in Pittsburgh called Penn Hall Academy. And it was a bunch of other kids just like me. And their parents who had disposable income weren't getting along well in public schools, but weren't bad kids. They were just their own self. And one of them, who I'm still pals with, a guy named Nathan Schulhoff, is the guy who invented the MP3 player. So we laugh about how everybody back then thought we were the, strange people, the outcasts. And Nathan did this, and a couple of other people in that class did some interesting things, and I do what I do. So,
yeah,
you never know.
So, Mark, were you a fan of a film like Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein? Was that something you liked?
Yeah. I loved Abbott and Costello. I did. I loved them. I loved Abbott. Laurel and Hardy kind of escaped me for some reason. I thought they were okay, and I know they were much better than I thought they were. But then again, I was a kid, and I haven't watched recently, but I was a big Marx Brothers fan, and grew up to almost knocking Groucho over at a luncheon one day at the Hillcrest Country Club, which is just fucking haunts me to this day. We were at tables, rounds, back to back, right? And I stood up and he stood up unknowingly at the same time. I moved my chair back, and Groucho weighed like 1.5 pounds, right? And like in those days, and he just like went towards the table. And I turned around. I said, "Oh fuck, man! I killed Groucho. I'm fucked."
Did you talk to him at all?
Yeah, I apologized profusely, and he said, "Oh, don't worry about it, kid. It happens.
Yeah.
I'm not." So if I was 20 years younger, I would have knocked you over.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just moments like that. I've had a lot of those.
So let's fast forward to the start of your professional career, and you've done a lot of different things. You've acted, you've written, you've produced.
You forgot to
So
say
you've
I was
kind
a
of
comedian. You forgot to say I was a comedian. That's pretty much the
comedian, yes,
first thing I
stand-up
did.
comedian, right?
That is correct.
Boy, that to
Yeah,
me,
I'm,
that's about the
I'm
hardest job you could ever have.
Well, it isn't. It isn't. Like I'm part of that famous class of '77 at the Comedy Store with David Letterman and Robin Williams and Jay Leno, and those guys. Billy Crystal and Michael Keaton. Uh, those are my peers. Those are the guys that I started there with, and we all arrived at the store pretty much within a couple of months of each other. Like Robin got there 2 weeks before me. Argus Hamilton was there like a week. Tom Dreesen had already been there quite a while, but and Jimmy Walker was there. Gabe was there because I ended up writing for Gabe Kaplan, writing a lot of his stand up. I met Gabe there through another comedian, Marvin Braverman. But I'm part of that original paid regular crew, the people who were the guys who were and girls who were there before the strike happened, and then the ones who were there right after the strike happened. So we're considered the original paid regulars there, and
Wow.
it was everything you might have ever heard about it and more that time. So yeah,
No, that's amazing. That's amazing.
yeah.
Of all those guys you mentioned, was there one that you really became close friends with?
Well, I'm friendly with just about everybody I met, but one of the closest friend for decades has been Mark Summers. We've been like really, 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 really close friends. Like he had a show on at the New World Stages right off Broadway this year, and my wife and I flew uh, in for the opening and spent 4 days there just watching him just kick ass on stage. And so I would say of all the people there, he and I have stayed the closest. I mean, I still, anytime I see anybody, we're always friendly, but Mark and I are, pretty close.
That's great. All right, let's talk about your first acting role and kind of a break from comedy, to say the least. The 1972 horror film, The Last House on the Left. It's an iconic movie. How did this come about for you, Mark?
Well, I had a manager, Dick Towers, who also is in the movie. The guy who plays, he went under the name of Gaylord St. James, who played the father, Dr. Collingwood. Dick was my manager. He was partners with a guy named Lloyd Greenfield and they had a company that was in Rockefeller Center. Lloyd Greenfield at the time managed Tom Jones and Engelbert Humperdinck. He was partners with Gordon Mills in a company, and he at that time was their and for quite a while was their manager. So Dick worked for him, and I was a client of his. I walked in and to his office one afternoon, and he said to me, "Oh, I was just going to call you. I have a movie audition for you." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yep." He gave me an address on a piece of paper. He said, "It's off of Fifth Avenue between Fifth and Sixth, about 10 blocks away from here, south of here. Go see two guys, a guy named Wes and a guy named Sean. Tell them I sent you." So I go down, go in the building, go up to the suite, and it's this kind of weird looking production office that was busy, but, you know, very haphazard and kind of shit all over the place. And I meet Wes and I meet Sean, and they give me some pages to read. I read them. Wes gave me a couple of little notes or something, and I did it. He said, "Okay." And I went back to Dick's office. And by the time I had gotten back to Dick's office, they had already called and said, "He's got the job. It's him. That's who we want."
Mm,
That's it. That's how it happened.
yeah. And of course, Wes is a pretty important guy in horror history, film history, the great Wes
Oh, yeah.
Craven.
And a
It was
great
his
guy.
first. What's that?
I said he was a great guy, too. He was just a really nice fellow. He was just
Yeah, I wanted to
solid.
ask you what it was like working under him. I've heard that he was very well organized. He didn't scream or yell. So a really enjoyable experience.
It's the best. I mean, it was, you got to remember that when Wes was directing Last House, he wasn't yet Wes Craven. He was Wes, and who was the director. So there's a different dynamic in play, and he was. I can say that he. I can say a couple of things about him. He had a definite vision and idea of what he wanted to say with this film, and he was always smart enough to not get in his own way, to let his inexperience get in his own way. And he was a good visual storyteller. I mean, I don't think there's a frame of wasted film in Last House.
How did you feel being a first time actor? You're working on a set. Some of the others were first time actors, but
Yeah,
some had more experience than you. Was it scary?
nah. It was,
No.
yeah, I we had a 20-day shooting schedule, 4 or 5 day weeks, and that wasn't enough time for me to get over the thrill that I was actually making a movie, uh, a real movie, that I was in a movie. Whatever it was, it wasn't like a big Hollywood production, but it was a real movie, and I was in it, and I had a big part in it. So that that didn't go away. That I kept that buzz all through production. It was just a thrill. It was just an utter thrill. And
Yeah.
and I learned, it's interesting. While not a very sophisticated shoot, technically, I still learned the fundamentals of everything I know during that 4 weeks. I learned pretty much everything I know now is an offshoot of the something I learned on that set.
Mark, I just rewatched the movie last night because I hadn't seen it in several years. There's a lot of rural locations. There's a few urban locations. Where exactly was it filmed?
The urban locations were New York City, Greenwich Village, and the rural location was Westport, Connecticut, in and around the home owned by Sean Cunningham's mother. Was the Collingwood house, was the Sean
Yeah.
Cunningham's mother.
I mean, it really looked like you were out in the middle of nowhere in some
We
of those
were.
scenes.
I mean, for the
Yeah.
most part, yeah, we're in the woods in Connecticut, so.
I'm curious about your thought process as you're making the film. I mean, you knew it was violent, but did you
Well,
realize just how violent it was and how controversial would it be? Was that awareness something that sunk in during the filming process?
um, we knew that we were making some, because there's a lot of stuff that we shot that never made it in, because it was just too bizarre. We knew that there were times when we were shooting some really weird shit, whether or not we had any cognition that it was, or precognition rather, that it had some place in the future that was going to. Who knows? You never know. I mean, not even if you're making a big studio picture, a $300 million picture with 10 A-level actors in it. How many of those have you seen made that go in the toilet? You just can't. You can't judge it. It's a weird business that way. Yeah, it's a weird phenomenon. You can get a film like Last House that was $93,000 and 20 days of shot in Super 16, made by a first-time director with actors, a couple of whom had experience, most who didn't, and it turns out to be a cult classic that's around like over 50 years after it was made, and you can make a 150, $200 million movie with big stars, and it goes it tanks in the box office. No one ever hears of it again. So it's can't. It's hard to predict that shit.
Yeah. Oh, sure. For those who have never seen the film, it's centered on a young woman played by Sandra Peabody. She plays Mary Collingwood, and she appears to be part almost of kind of an all-American family that lives in a rural location. And she and her friend, I believe, are going to a concert, and then they get attacked by these fugitives,
Catch and
several of
kidnap.
whom What's that?
Attacked and kidnapped.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, everything happens to them. I mean, it's pretty graphic. And then the film deals with how Mary responds to this. And it was really the kind of a film that had never been made before. It's been made since. There have been efforts to imitate it. Some okay, some not so okay. When the film was originally set to come out, it was actually going to be rated X. And then supposedly Wes Craven, he cut back some footage to try to get it an R rating, but still couldn't get it past the censors. So he ends up putting all the original footage back in, resubmits it, and they give him the R rating anyway. As you look back, do you think it should have been rated X from the beginning, or do you think that was maybe a little bit of an overreaction when they were
I
putting a
I think it
stamp on this
was,
movie?
I think it was an overreaction. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't. I'm a writer, so I'm not a big fan of any kind of censorship or even labeling things. Just because everybody thinks to most people, Last House on the Left is a horror movie. It's a it's they put it into that box, but it isn't to me. To me, it's a movie on social commentary. It's about the ongoing class warfare that happens. And what proved that to me, or what highlighted that rather, is I saw the film a few years ago after not having seen it for maybe 10 years. I just hadn't seen it. And the dinner scene is caught my attention, and then I ran it back and watched it again, and I realized that's the scene that not only seals the Collingwood's fate, but it also tells the audience that what this is about is class warfare, because
Mm.
West is constantly having dialogue showing the difference in the socioeconomics of the two families who are sitting there, right? And it's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and each exchange hammers that point home more, especially when you see there are these little insert shots of like Dr. Collingwood's eyes and David Hess's jacket that's all tattered and threadbare. So these are, and now it becomes David becomes aware that he's being judged, and that leads to the next scene in the bedroom where they just lay out the fact that you're going to kill these motherfuckers, because who are they to think, they got, what does David say? They got 25 forks for every pea in the plate. But there it goes. There's the class warfare.
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about to me from beginning to end. Even the relationship, the Collingwoods disapproving relationship of that their daughter has with the stable girl, that she's a different class of person. So that's what it is to me. But what do I know? That's just one opinion.
No, I think what you say is very legitimate. You mentioned David Hess, who does a great job in this movie. So he plays
Amazing.
Krug Stillo, the
Bruce,
leader of the gang of convicts.
Bruce.
Very fine actor. What
Bruce.
was he like on the set?
It's pronounced Krug, not Krug. Krug.
Krug. Krug.
Correct. What was David like on the set? Depends
Yeah.
on who you were. Yeah, that depends on who you were. Uh, to me, he was fine. He was just, David, as I have come to get to know him. To some of the other people, he was Krug 24/7. So yeah, he got into this method acting thing because it was David's first movie too. So he was a talented and working, singer songwriter with a lot of hits, with like a ton of hits. But this was his first part, and Marty Cove is the one who got him the part. Marty Cove was living, Martin Cove, right? So Marty
Sure.
was living,
Yeah.
yeah, Marty was living with David's sister Judy, and Marty had auditioned. I believe Marty either had auditioned or wanted to audition for the part of Krug, but then he realized, or he did. I don't know what the exact. I have to ask him when I talk to him, but I think it was he auditioned, and they said he wasn't. mean enough, because Marty's actually one of the sweetest guys ever. So that he wasn't. So Marty said, I know somebody. And it was Marty who then told David, you know, that there might be a movie part for you. So David got an audition. Marty got David the audition, and
Mhm.
the rest is what it is. So
Yeah, I've heard it can be a little unsettling to be on set with one of those method actors because they're almost unapproachable, I guess.
well, see, that's the thing. They're unapproachable if you get caught up in the bullshit. But if you're beyond that, like my relationship with David was, like I would see him doing that stuff, like being that person all the time. And I would just shake my head and laugh, right? And he and I would make eye contact, and he would just kind of break it for a second and then go back to it. We ended up, I say this because Dave and I ended up being like very, very close, like brothers, and stayed that way until he passed away in, I think, 2012 or 2011. Um, he was a complicated guy, and extraordinarily talented. He did all the music for Last House,
Mm,
so he was very talented, but sometimes a handful.
yeah. So you did remain in touch with him right till the end.
We didn't just remain in touch. We remained like our kids knew each other. We became very, very close friends. Like
Yeah.
that I'm grateful to Last House, believe it or not, just for the fact that uh, David and I had this great friendship, and Freddie Lincoln and I were friends till the day he died, and Jeremy and I are friends. So, and Marty, I just talked to Marty last week. So we all, we stayed friends. We stayed in touch with each other.
David Hess does a great job in the movie. Also, Sandra Peabody, who I mentioned a moment
It's
ago. So
terrific.
she plays Mary Collingwood. She's received, I think, a lot of deserving critical praise for what she
Yes, of course,
did.
she was
Very,
terrific.
very difficult role. Have you kept in touch with her over the years?
No, I don't know. The two girls, Lucy and Sandra, nobody's really had any contact with them. And from what I understand, although I have no personal knowledge of this, I think they're trying that, at least with Sandra, from what I understand, she sort of distanced herself from Last House. Again, no personal knowledge of that. It's just what I've heard from convention bookers who have told me that they've tried to get her. That's how I
Yeah,
come by that knowledge. That
I
they've tried
see.
to get her, and she wants nothing to do with it. So I can look. Everybody's got their own personal experience, and no one is better or less valid than anyone else's. That's for sure.
Mark, you've mentioned a couple of times Martin Kove, who's had a very fine career. Of course, he would go on to star in the Karate Kid movies, and he plays such a vicious bastard there. But you mentioned that he's not like that in real life. He's completely the opposite.
Shows you what a good actor he is. He's
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I talked to him last week. I sent him a text, something, and I said, "Hey, just calling to say congrats on your show on Cobra Kai." And he said, "Oh, call me." And so I called him, and we talked, and I said, "People don't know this about you, Cole, but when they see you being an asshole, is John Kreese." And he started to laugh. He just started to laugh. I said, "They don't know you the way I know you." And he said, "Yeah, well, you know, it's it's my job." And I said, "Yeah, you're great." I said, It's everybody." And I have a bunch of friends who know Marty also. I like some friends outside of the business. They know him because, they grew up with him. And we were all friendly. We were all like back in New York, part of a group of people, some actors, some just normal, not actors. But we stayed friends, and, no, Marty's a sweetheart. He's a cool guy.
Yeah.
He's a really nice guy.
So in Last House, he plays one of the two goofy police officers.
Yeah.
And I guess that's consistent. Wes Craven, that's kind of how he often portrayed police, right?
Well, he used them as comic relief, because when you have scenes as intense as are in Last House, you'll notice that most of those police scenes are placed right after that, because it gives the audience a chance to kind of harmlessly let the steam out. because those are very I mean, I saw people back in the day looking at those scenes for the first time. I saw the effect. As a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, I was in South America. My wife is a Colombian woman, so every year we take an extended vacation. We go for 3 months to visit her family. And I got an email from a friend of mine who said with a link. It just said, "I'm not going to tell you what this is. Just click on it." So I did, and it took me to the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And apparently, 2 years ago, this month, there was an exhibit of 6 films from around the world in the entire history of filmdom. 6 films were chosen to sustain the theory of what films can do, what visual effect films can have on the human body. And of all those films, those thousands of films, one of the 6 they picked was Last House. So we went from being a shitbag little slasher movie in a drive-in, right, when it first came out, to being part of a serious film exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So there's no fucking explaining anything.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So
It's interesting, Mark. It's a film that some people love, others do not. One of the people who actually loved it, one of the most famous film critics of the last 50 years, Roger Ebert.
Tell me about
when
it.
you heard something like that, did that surprise you?
Well, here's what happened. I'll tell you how I heard about it. The film Last House came out, and Sean had delivered, I don't know, I'm going to say a maximum of like 30 prints to Hallmark Releasing to put into their drive-ins and the theaters that they have, because that's why it was made. It was made to like go directly to drive-ins and to be part of, a recurring group of films that they could make for low money and then get their money back. And Sean delivers those 30 prints, and then Roger Ebert's review comes out, right? And somebody calls me and says, "You're not going to fucking believe this." And I ran out, went to a newsstand, got a Chicago Sun-Times, and went, "Holy shit!" And I went down to Sean's office to see. Obviously, I figured he knew about it. I walked into his office, and he was running around like this. Like on the phone. What do you mean? He had to deliver 1,100 prints, because what happened was when Roger Ebert put that review out, right? A 3.5 out of 4-star review for a shitty little independent movie, right? And everybody wanted to see it. So Sean got an order for something like 1,100 prints that he had to deliver within, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks or something, some ridiculously short time. This was not the days when you could digitally reproduce something you could do a print in a couple of hours, digitally reproducing it. This was when you actually had to expose film, and really you had to make a film print. You had to have cans. You had to, this was like serious. And there were maybe, I don't know, 4 labs in New York that could do it. And so I think Sean had orders in every one of them. Yeah, it was pretty trippy. So that's,
Yeah.
and it changed everything. It just really changed everything. I think Jeremy says that Jeremy says that we were in the top 10 for something like 3 weeks or a month. And I recall it being like 2 weeks, but she could be right. But still, that little movie being in a top 10 film in the United States is pretty weird.
Yeah, it's incredible. You mentioned Sean. That's the producer, right? Sean Cunningham?
Sean Cunningham. That's what I meant. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, right. In a moment, Tracy wants to talk about some of the stuff, and I want to hear about it too, some of the stuff you did later on that was not horror. But why did you stop acting, at least for a while after Last House? You didn't have another acting credit for a while.
Okay. The answer to that question is I was so profoundly affected in a positive way by the process of filmmaking that I wanted to be more the storyteller than an element of the story. So I decided to learn how to do that, and that's that. I wanted to make the thing, because I would watch Wes and Sean and how we were there to do our parts, and we were in and out all, whenever we were on, but they were there all the time telling that story, and that's who I wanted to be. I wanted to tell the story. So that's the simple reason.
Oh my gosh. Wow. It's been fascinating to have you share about your experience with the Last House movie. I watched it for the first time last night, and it was
Talking to you?
definitely quite a
That's
moving film. Yeah, last night, and it was quite a moving film, that's
Yeah.
for sure. So thank you so much for sharing all
Oh,
that
please.
info.
My
Um,
pleasure.
I'm going to just turn it a little bit to some of the comedy pieces that you've done. So, two huge pieces like Who's the Boss, Charles in Charge. They're like icons of the 80s. I grew up in the 80s, so those were my go to
Sure.
shows as a kid. Um, you've written for those shows. How did that come about for you? And how did you feel writing for shows like that?
Well, okay. There are a couple of questions in there. I'll try to get them. How did it come about? Well, you want to know Charles in Charge, or you want to know Who's the Boss first? Which one?
Oh my gosh, definitely Charles in Charge. I'm curious.
Okay. So, at the time, I was writing partners with Lee Aronson. Lee Aronson you know who that is, right? Okay. Yeah.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
So Lee and I were buds and writing partners. So the executive producers of House Calls were, I think, if that's the right show, were Bill and Kathy Greer, husband and wife, lovely, lovely people, and they were now doing Charles in Charge. Lee knew Bill Greer. Lee was actually out of the business at the time and was working in, I think, a videotape facility, cataloging videotapes. And then he and I became partners, and he told me that he had a friend we knew who was the executive producer of Charles in Charge. Called Bill. Bill said, "Yes, I'll be happy to take a pitch from you guys." Lee and I came up with 5 pitches, went in, they bought one of them, we wrote it. They then came back to, they being Bill and Kathy Greer, came back to
Mhm.
us and said, "Would you guys do another one?" And then we did another one. And then after we turned in the first draft of the second one, they offered us a job on the show. And we had a manager, Steve Sauer, who actually Lee had got through, who's also Bernie. You remember Bernie Coppell from Love Boat? Okay. So Bernie was managed, we knew Bernie. Bernie was managed by Steve Sauer, who now manages Steve Carell. And Steve took us on as clients and made a great deal for us on Charles in Charge. And then it was Steve's other client at the time was Tony Danza, right? So
Right.
he then introduced us to Tony, and we then wrote 2 very important episodes of Who's the Boss. We wrote the Farewell to Nick, the one that explains to Samantha the death of James Coco, her grandfather. And we
Mhm.
wrote one called The Matriculator, which was the series changing episode where Tony decides to go back to college and change his life. So we wrote 2 very important episodes of that show. So that's how those things happen.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that is so cool. I appreciate you sharing that. Just I was huge fans of those shows
Okay.
back in the
Okay.
80s, and
And the other question you had was, um, what was it like to work on those shows? And I have to admit something. I am completely unimpressed by that aspect of where I am and what I'm doing, because it's just so everyday for me, right?
right.
Like I never I worked on the People's Choice Awards. I wrote and co-produced the People's Choice Award back in those days, like, for a couple of years with my other partner, Sam Denoff, the late Sam Denoff.
Right.
And one of our jobs was the night of the show, we would kind of be schmoozing the talent, because you had a lot of talent there that the show had booked, and we had written all of the takeoffs and landings for them and all of the little speeches. So it was kind of like natural that we'd all be in the same place. So that they have these big green rooms behind the stages, no matter what studio they're shooting in. And it's like a party. It's like, it's like a lounge with, like, think like an airport lounge, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I was in there one night. I'll tell you, if you want to hear a story. I was
Oh, yeah.
my first wife was a huge fan of Silence of the Lambs and Anthony Hopkins, right? So I came home one day and I told her, "Hey, guess what? We booked Anthony Hopkins as a presenter on the show. I'm sick. I'm going this year. I'm going with you. I promise." I go, and I said, "Yeah, of course." So we go, and the writers and the producers all had a table close to the wings, so that if we needed to get backstage, we could, without having to walk through the room, we could just go. So I'm in the back in the green room, which is this big loungy area. I'm standing at the bar with Carol Burnett, Michael Douglas, and Steven Spielberg. Okay, because we were giving an award to Steven that year, and Sam and I had written it, and Michael was presenting and reading the thing that we wrote. So we were having some conversation about that, and Carol was there talking, and just like shooting the shit. And I see out of the corner of my eye, I see Anthony Hopkins come in, and he's talking to a page. You guys know what a page is, right? Like an usher.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and the usher points to me, and I see Anthony Hopkins shake hands with the page and thank him, and then come directly over to me. So he comes over to me, and he has his hand out, and he said, "I assume you're Mark." And I said, "Yes." He says, "Tony Hopkins, nice to meet you. Tony Hopkins." And he's shaking and said, "Tony Hopkins, pleasure, Tony Hopkins." And they're laughing. Spielberg's laughing. Everybody says hello, because every famous person knows every other famous person. So
Mm-hmm.
not true. But everybody thinks that they happen to actually know each other. So I'm talking to Hopkins, and I remember that my wife, she's out there, and that she had asked me to get an autograph and a picture and whatever. And I said to him, "Tony, I have a small favor to ask you." And he looked at me and said, "Go ahead, bring it back." And I said, "How did you know that?" He said, "Oh, it's always that." So I go out, and my wife is sitting there, and I said, "Look, Jan, you got to come with me. I need your help. There's something." She said, "What do you mean you need my help? Why would you need?" "No, seriously, I'll tell you when we get there. You got to come with me. It's really important." So she excused herself. So I bring her back into the green room, and she's not really looking where we're walking. She's kind of looking at me, as we're walking, trying to suss out why I'm asking her. And, and then she picks her head up, and she sees Hopkins. And I said, "Tony, this is my wife, Jan." And he says, "Tony Hopkins, pleasure to meet you, Jan." And she goes, "Ha, ha." It was like Jackie Gleason in the fucking Honeymooners. She, "Ha, ha, ha, ha," like this. And I said, "Okay, time to go back now." Time to go back to the dinner, So I got an autograph for her and something, and we say goodbye. So I take her back out. I see her come back. Michael was gone into makeup. Carol was gone. It's just Steven there. So I go back to where my drink was, and he looked at me and he said, "That was your wife?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What? She didn't want to meet me? What am I, chopped liver?" And I said, "No, Steven, you're not chopped liver, but you're not Hannibal Lecter either." So that's just
Oh my God.
so that I've had so many of those kind of moments that
Mm-hmm.
it's just not I get serious about the work. I don't get like fanboyed about where I am.
Oh my gosh. Well, writing is just so important. I mean, where would these shows be without the writers? So
I,
you have like a
they,
fab job to
I
do that.
swear they'd be. Take a look at the writer's strike. That's the answer to your question. They'd be nowhere.
Mm.
Oh, gee. Right. So I have one more question to ask you. I thought it was pretty cool when I was going through your IMDb that you wrote 1978's
Bugs-
How Bugs Won the
oh,
West.
yeah, when I knew you were
And
going to say that. The moment anyone says, "I thought it was really cool," I know that's a Bugs Bunny thing. Go ahead.
that is like, that is so iconic right there. And you worked with Mel Blanc. What was he like? Did you actually get to
I
interact with him at all?
not, something, not really. I got the job because Warner Brothers TV was in business with me. They wanted to do some stuff with me, and the executive who hired me was friends with my agent, so I got that job, and uh, it was like a fluke thing that it was live action. It was fun to do because give it. I like jobs that are challenges, and that show was a challenge. I had to look at every Western themed Bugs Bunny cartoon that was made, and there was something like 200 of them, and pull out, and then
Oh, wow.
create a spine of a story, and then pull out frames from those cartoons that supported the story, and then firm it up with the live action stuff that we shot with Denver Pyle. So, but it was fun.
Oh,
It
wow.
was fun.
Oh, I can imagine. I saw that and I was like, Bugs Bunny, like that's the coolest thing I've ever
It's
heard. So,
Yeah,
oh,
it's a
wow.
very cool credit, I have to admit.
Mark, one other show I wanted to ask you about was Harry and the Hendersons, which lasted for 72
Sure.
episodes in the early 1990s.
Hmm.
The star of that show is,
Correct.
I think, a really outstanding, underrated actor, Bruce Davison, who's done a
Ooh.
lot of horror. Did you get to talk to him?
Mhm. I do. We stayed friends. I hadn't seen him
Oh,
in a
really?
long time. Actually, I'll tell you a funny story. I hadn't seen him in a long time. So he was making an appearance at, I think, the Schiller convention in New Jersey. And I had a friend going, and I said, "Hey, an old buddy of mine is appearing there. Just go up and say hello from me." So my friend Gabe goes up to Bruce's table, and he says, "I have a big hello from Marc Sheffler." And he told me Bruce like lit up. He just said, "Oh wow, oh yeah, how's he doing? What's going on?" So, and we communicate, Facebook, Twitter every now and then. Yeah, he's a good guy too. I've been very lucky. I work with mostly nice people. But
You know,
Bruce is an extraordinary actor.
oh, yeah,
No, he's
he
like
is
a
great.
serious fucking actor. He's not a guy who just
Yeah.
like hits the mark and says lines. He's a real actor.
Tracy and I, we each have kind of lists, dream lists of people we want to interview. And I think Bruce Davison is near the top of my list. Starting with Willard and all the other films that he's made over the years. And he's versatile too. He was in Seinfeld. He's done dramatic roles. He's just terrific. Mark, before we let you go, I wanted to ask one final question.
Sure.
What are you doing these days? Are you interested in writing for another TV series? Is something like that in the offing?
Well, I have a show that a half hour comedy that I'm trying to with a producing partner setting up in Colombia. A kind of bilingual comedy, English Spanish comedy, called Tio Loco, which in Spanish
Hmm.
means crazy uncle. It's about a guy like me, although a much younger version, uh, who leaves LA to go be with his wife, who's decided to return back to a little village outside of Bogota to take care of her mother. And it's about this guy. It's like a fish out of water story about a guy who kind of becomes part of this 13-member extended Colombian family, this lunatic family. Um, and I'm writing a film. I have it written. I'm honing it and polishing it now, called Who's Your Caddy? It's about an old man, an arrogant young golfer, and a dog with an uncanny knowledge of the game. So, and
That's great.
yeah, and then I've got a show that I'm working on about living out. I live in my wife and we have a house out in Indio, California, near Palm Springs. So uh, we stay here most of the time. So I have a show I'm writing about 4 retired men who called Silverbacks who just can't understand how they got to be so old so fast. So I keep busy.
Well, that's great. You've got several projects you're working on. We wish you the best of luck with those. Also, your book too.
Yes, my book is called "Dumb Effing Luck: The Story of Me and My Very Successful Mediocre Career."
And when's that coming out?
I don't know. I'm halfway through it.
Still working on it.
Still working on it.
Well, listen, Marc. Best of luck with all that.
Thank you.
It's been a blast talking to you over this past hour. Great stories, great insight.
All right, man. Thank you. Bye, Tracy. It's nice meeting you, Bruce. Same here. Take care.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Okay.
Our thanks again to Marc Sheffler, Last House on the Left, but many writing and producing credits as well. Check him out at IMDb. We hope to hear from Marc in the future as well. And our thanks to Stephen Joyner, who helped set up this interview and an interview that we did a couple weeks ago with John Hancock, a director. We appreciate Stephen's efforts. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, Tracy and I will return to talk about the horror and sci-fi convention that I dared to attend over the weekend. You're listening to The Ghostly Gallery. Welcome back to the Ghostly Gallery podcast. Again, our thanks to Marc Sheffler, a very funny man. Great stories and insight about his career in Hollywood and also outside of Hollywood. He's done a little bit of everything, stand-up comedy. He has done film, TV work. He's acted, he's written, he's produced. So we do appreciate his time. As we get set to wrap up the show over the next few minutes, did want to mention, at least briefly, that I went to my first horror convention of 2024 over this past weekend. It's called Horror and Sci-Fi Fest. It takes place in Verona, New York, which is really just a short drive, a little over an hour from where I live in Cooperstown. It's a smaller event, but well organized, really well run, celebrities that are down to earth and very approachable. And did get to talk to a couple of notable horror actors. One of them, Linnea Quigley, the Scream Queen. She was one of the original Scream Queens from the 1980s. And also longtime actor Michael Berryman. So, Tracy, I just wanted to briefly mention working or not working with them, but at least having a chance to ask some questions of them during the panels that were done. So Linnea Quigley, she has been in a lot of great films, including Return of the Living Dead, Night of the Demons. Her career goes back to the 1980s, 170 credits in film and TV. She mentioned that she actually grew up in Iowa, small town, very cold winters. She wanted to get out of there. She wanted to get to the warm weather. She ended up going to Southern California. Her first job there was at a Jack LaLanne health spa, of all places. And then she had a chance to be a stand-in on a film. And that was really the bug that bit her and made her very much interested in doing horror. She also did talk about one of the early films that she did. She worked with veteran actor Jack Palance, whom we've talked about on this show. Of course, he did a great job as Dracula in 1974. Apparently, Jack was very interested in Linnea, kept asking her to dinner, and she made about 6 or 7 different excuses as to why she couldn't go. I think she was a teenager at the time, and man, he had to have been at least in his 50s or 60s, so that wasn't going to work out too well. When she's not making films, and she's had a great career, she runs a sanctuary for animals. She has dogs, cats, goats. She's very much involved in the effort to help animals, fight against animal abuse, that kind of thing is very much close to her heart. One of the people asked her what her favorite horror films were, and she mentioned two that certainly are prominent in horror history. One of them being the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. By the way, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of that film. And she's also a big fan of the film When a Stranger Calls. This was the original movie that came out in the late 1970s. The first 20 minutes or so of that movie are absolutely terrifying. So those are two of her favorites. She also said she's very close friends with another actress named Melinda Bowers. They have done some films together, and she is someone that really Linnea can go to when she has questions or maybe is struggling a little bit, needs some help. So it's kind of nice to hear that she's developed that strong friendship. But 170 credits and counting, still very active in the horror industry. And then the other actor that I met, and I know that this is somebody you're really fascinated by, Tracy, and that's Michael Berryman. He was there.
Right.
So he did a panel. He's done a lot of great films. The Hills Have Eyes, Deadly Blessing, The Crow. Of course, he did the iconic non-horror film, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. His career started in 1975, and it was sort of by happenstance. He really wasn't working, didn't have any money. A friend of his living in Washington State, Michael was down near L.A., so he got a call from this friend who said, why don't you come up and help me build a house? And Michael had nothing to do at the time. He had no money. So he said, okay, I'll do that. I'll take this job on. And so he ended up helping his friend complete the house. When that was done, he had absolutely no clue what he was going to do next. But he did go back to California, started running a gift shop. And then one day he just happened, it's one of those strange occurrences. Who knows why it happened? He ran into a film executive who looked at him and said he had, quote, a very interesting face. Now, Michael Berryman, horror fans probably know, was born with an unusual disease. He does not have hair. He does not have fingernails. Apparently, his father was exposed to radiation, and I think somehow that resulted in this disease that Michael Berryman was born with. So, he certainly does have a distinctive look. And Michael agreed with him. Yeah, I'm pretty unusual looking. He ended up getting put into a movie called Doc Savage, and that led to more roles. And 111 credits later, 50 years later, he is still going strong. 75 years of age. I asked him if he has any intention of retiring. He said absolutely not. He wants to just keep going, making movies. Of course, he's best known for the original The Hills Have Eyes from 1977. That's probably the film for which he is best known. It was a movie that, he had no expectations of it becoming this cult classic, was absolutely shocked when it did become this, really this horror masterpiece, if you will. Much like Linnea Quigley, he is very interested in animals. He lived in a wolf sanctuary for many years, big-time animal lover. One time, President Gerald Ford showed up at the sanctuary, wanted to meet some of the wolves, was very interested in that. So here Michael Berryman, at the time, young, unknown actor, ends up meeting Gerald Ford, and Ford wrote out a check for the sanctuary for $200, which was pretty
Oh my
cool.
goodness. Wow.
So both he and Linnea Quigley, they're just very down-to-earth, approachable people, willing to talk. I've talked about this before. Horror conventions, the celebrities, the stars from these films, they have a reputation for being so good with the public, for being down to earth, for not having large egos, not being demanding. And really, these two, Linnea Quigley and Michael Berryman, fall right into that category. And I know Berryman is a guy that you've been researching as well. He's of particular interest to you, right, Tracy?
Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, he's had a lot of really great roles. And, he has such a huge, I guess, effect on the horror genre in general. And I think he would be a fascinating individual to have a conversation with. I'm so jealous you got that opportunity to see him and to chat with him. And the same way with Linnea, again, another icon in the horror industry.
They started out as no names. They didn't necessarily have backgrounds as actors. We know the industry chews up a lot of people and then throws them out onto the street. And these
Mhm.
two have not only survived, but have succeeded extremely well. And they've
Mhm.
just had fabulous careers, each with over 100 credits, both extremely well known and well respected in the industry, and both remaining very active. So, yeah, it was kind of cool to have a chance to ask questions of these horror icons. A lot of fun.
Nice. I'm so glad that you shared that with us because I was really curious when you mentioned you were going. I was like, I need to hear more.
Yeah, it was cool. It really was. My wife and I were two of the few people that were not dressed up in costumes of some sort. So we sort of stood out as sore thumbs. We were kind of the Marilyn Munsters of the convention, if you will. So that was
Oh,
kind of
goodness.
interesting, but it was a lot of fun. It's the second straight year we've been to Sci-Fi and Horror Fest, and they do a nice job with it. It's a smaller event, but I kind of like the smaller events because there's really an opportunity to meet with celebrities, to talk to people. You're not being crowded out. You're not waiting on these incredibly long lines. So yeah, very much a good experience. Well, Tracy, thank you for being with us over this last hour plus. We certainly appreciate your efforts. Our thanks to our guest, actor, writer, producer, stand up comedian Marc Sheffler. We thank all of you folks, our loyal listeners, for being with us here in this Museum of the Macabre. And we hope you'll join us next time right here in the Ghostly Gallery.